just want to say I had a good weekend this weekend. It was a nice weekend. Last night, FCC Oak Ridge invited me to a baseball game with them. And I went and saw the Tennessee Smokies play the Chattanooga Lookouts. And really, let's be honest, it's kind of a shame that I haven't been to a Smokies game to this point until last night, because they are the Double-A franchise, the minor league franchise of the Chicago Cubs. My Chicago Cubs. So it was good to get to go. Last night I got a picture with the near life-size Chris Bryant bobblehead, last year's NL MVP. So that was fun. Also, my heart was gladdened a little bit yesterday as I saw photos of the rallies in Boston. Did you all see this? In Boston, there was another white supremacist rally that had, I don't know, somewhere between 20 and 40 people. Meanwhile, there was an anti-white supremacy rally that had well over 20,000 people. And the photos are striking because you have these people full of hate hiding in this tiny little gazebo, and then there's all this empty space, and then just people everywhere standing for love. Also yesterday in Dallas, there was an anti-racism rally that I had friends and family that attended. And to see their videos and to see them stand up for love warmed my heart. And these are good things, but it doesn't mean that we're done. It doesn't mean that we can say, see, look, there were like 20 people standing for hate and 20,000 standing for love. We're done. We're good. No, sadly, this is not an issue that can be solved in a couple of days, because this is an issue that we've been facing for generations if we would open our eyes. The other enjoyable thing for me this weekend was that on Friday, Netflix debuted The Defenders. So I've talked about Daredevil a little bit before in sermons. So Marvel and Netflix have come together and had quite a few different series on different superheroes. They had Daredevil, they had Jessica Jones, they had Luke Cage, and they had Danny Rand, the Iron Fist. And this Friday, they brought all four together in The Defenders. And I watched all 8 episodes on Friday. It was awesome. It was a lot of fun. It was great to see these 4 heroes come together and work to save New York City. I'm not going to tell you whether they succeeded or not. I won't spoil it. But it was a lot of fun to watch these 4 characters that I'd enjoyed in each of their separate shows come together as one. And one thing I really enjoy about these characters is they don't believe themselves to be heroes. In fact, they're often heard saying, I'm no hero. Their actions tell differently, and the people around them recognize them as heroes and are thankful for the work that they do. It's easy to judge people by their actions. In fact, that's probably the easiest way we have to judge people. What are they doing? When they're doing good, we can see them as good. But also we can judge people by their words, by what they say. So let's go to our scripture. Of course, you know, with me, first, let's look at some context with our scripture. Because it's kind of weird, right? The beginning, the Pharisees and the scribes come out and say, hey, we've seen you and your disciples eat before you wash your hands. You know that's sinful, right? So what's going on here is the idea of like the cleanliness laws, right? Has anybody kind of flipped through Leviticus ever? And you see all the different purity laws and the cleanliness laws and why we can't eat shellfish, right? That's what the Pharisees and the scribes are talking about. The idea being that if you eat something unclean, it makes you unclean. And so if you're not washing your hands before you eat, you're adding uncleanliness to the food you're eating, even if that's clean, pure food, and making yourself unclean. And so the Pharisees are saying, you're breaking some major laws here, Jesus. Now Jesus comes right back at the Pharisees. And he says, yeah, the laws also say to honor your father and mother, and you're not doing that. Now what was going on here, as far as we can tell, is that religious leaders at the time, and there is some thought that this is actually what was happening in Matthew's time, whether or not it was actually happening in Jesus' time, but Matthew's using this example because his church, his audience is very familiar with this, that the religious leaders are basically having the elders of the community give their resources to the church, and then they're not taking care of those elders. And instead of even using that money for the church, a lot of the religious leaders are basically then moving it from the church into their pockets. So they're using the church to take their parents' money and use it how they wish. And so that's what that little bit's about right there. And so Jesus comes back at them with that. And then he addresses the crowd. Now the crowd is very familiar with cleanliness laws. This is stuff that they've probably heard all their life, assuming that they're a Jewish audience, which we have no reason to think that they're not. So cleanliness and uncleanliness wasn't a trivial matter. This was something that had to do with maintaining the holiness to which God's people were called. If we are bringing in uncleanliness, we're making ourselves less holy. And we're God's holy people. We have to be clean. We have to be holy. So if we're eating unclean food, we're eating unholy food, we're making ourselves unholy. So this wasn't a small matter. This was a big deal to them. It meant something. And so it's powerful when Jesus says, there's another way to think about this. Jesus is saying that it matters way more that our words, what comes out of our mouths and through our hearts, are clean. That matters way more than what goes into our mouths and through our stomachs and out into the sewers. Which I love when Jesus kind of makes a poop joke. That's when you know. And there's more in this that tell us Jesus was human as well as divine. There's more in this story that I think tell us that. But Jesus making a poop joke is a pretty good sign, I think, that Jesus was human. But it's a powerful thing to hear and keep in our mind that what we say can make us holy. Especially for us right now. As we've had people who have been spewing hate from their mouths and their hearts. And even people who haven't maybe been spewing hate, but have been defending those who do, or at least not outright condemning those who do. Because in defending or even staying silent on those that spread such hate, it can make us wonder, how clean are the words coming out of their mouths, out of their hearts? Then there's the second part of this story, which honestly is one of my favorite scriptures, this and the version in Mark. So, before we look at it, we need to be clear what Matthew's doing with this. Matthew is adamant, and I've mentioned this before, Matthew is adamant that prior to the resurrection, Jesus' message was just for Israel. He believes that before the resurrection, this was a contained thing. Now, with the death and the resurrection, it opened up. Now, Matthew's also writing probably to a primarily Jewish Christian audience. And so, for his audience, they really believe that they were the primary message receivers of what God is doing in the world. And they're really struggling with these new people that are coming in and becoming a part of it who aren't Jewish and don't have the history of the laws and everything they do. So there's another reason maybe why Matthew is writing about this cleanliness, non-cleanliness issue, because Gentiles aren't that concerned about it. And so the audience Matthew is writing to is struggling to understand what it means with all the history and laws that we have and still hold dear, that we're bringing in people who aren't a part of that. So Matthew is adamant that pre-death and resurrection, the work Jesus did was for the Jewish people. And that's what Jesus was focused on in his life when he was here. That's what Matthew believes, unlike Luke. If we look at Luke, Luke doesn't believe that at all. And Luke makes a point that every time that we think we know where the circle is and who's in, God makes it a point to bring somebody just outside that circle and say, no, you're going to have to make it a little bigger. And so Luke and Matthew are attempting different things, and so they tell different stories, and they focus on different things, and they believe different things about what Jesus was doing. But we're looking at Matthew right now, and so Matthew is very consistent on this fact. And in fact, this story is one of just two in Matthew where Jesus performs a miracle for someone who's not in the circle, who's not an Israelite. And in fact, she's a Canaanite. And that's coded language here, especially for a Jewish audience. We're not sure how many people actually self-identified as Canaanite in this time. So I think Matthew is really using that word for a purpose. But for Matthew writing, this use of Canaanite is very coded language, because you remember in post-Exodus, when the Jewish people are coming and trying to gain their promised land, that promised land wasn't empty and waiting for them. It was held by the Canaanites. These people who were standing in the way of what Jesus wanted to do, or not Jesus, sorry, what God wanted to do, what the Israelite people had been promised. And so the Canaanites in a lot of the Hebrew Bible are not looked upon fondly, because we're reading this from the perspective of the people who are trying to get that land from the Canaanites. So Canaanite, I think, is a very clearly chosen word here, because this is the enemy. And yet, unlike any of the people in the inner circle, she recognizes exactly who Jesus is. She addresses him as Son of David. She's using Messiah language. She sees him for who he is, even though she's not part of the people he's talking to. And in fact, just before this, we have Jesus trying to say something that he thinks everybody should get. The disciples don't get it. He's like, what, you don't understand either? Yet she seems to get it. So Matthew has this story here, I think, not to show Jesus being, I can't think of a PC way to say this, Jesus being an axe, right? I think what Matthew doesn't see it that way. Matthew is seeing this. He actually thinks this is the right way for Jesus to act in the situation, because this isn't who Jesus is supposed to be dealing with right now. But he puts it here because he wants to have the audience place themselves in the spot of the other, to see someone outside struggle for acceptance, someone who's outside the struggle that they have to get what is freely offered to those inside. So Matthew isn't trying to point out how Jesus can be rude. He's trying to make a point about what it might be like to be somebody from the outside. To see the great faith that they can have, the power in persistence, in not giving up when it would be so easy when treated that way to just walk away. Clearly, I'm not going to get what I want here. He just called me a dog. But no, she didn't give up. In fact, she was warned. She was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted. And that's good. Here's the thing, though. I think it's really easy for us to say in the situations that we have now where there is racism and there is bigotry and there is misogyny and it's in the systems in place, it's really easy for us to say, well, why can't the people who are downtrodden do the work? I mean, they're the ones affected. Why can't they be the ones to go deal with this? Why do we have to play a part? And even if we're not quite at that point, it's easy for us to want to go to the people of color, to go to the women struggling with these issues and say, but what do we do? Help us. How do we fix this mess? As tempting as that might be, really, it's not helpful either for us to go and ask them. Because it is our mess. It's our issue to fix. We absolutely listen when they speak. Because they've been denied a voice for too long. But we don't turn to the victims and say, you fix it, or tell us how to fix it. It's too hard for us. No, we need to work to dismantle the racist systems that are set up in our society, the misogynistic systems that are set up in our society. That's on us because we're the ones that set it up. And that's what's interesting to me about Jesus here. You know, so much of the Bible is written from an oppressed viewpoint. It's written from the viewpoint of the downtrodden. The Israelite people who are writing the Hebrew Bible, much of the Hebrew Bible is written while they're in exile. It's written while they've been forced out of their homes and their temple destroyed. The Bible is from the perspective of the downtrodden. The New Testament is written under the heel of the Roman government. The Bible is written from an oppressed viewpoint. But this story right here, everyone involved in this story, the power's with Jesus. He's a male, she's a female. He's an Israelite, she's a barely existent at all nationality that clearly aren't going to have power in Jerusalem, in Israel, in the surrounding areas. At least the Jews are a recognized and approved people by the Roman government. They're allowed to have their Jewish religion, and in fact, it's propped up by the Roman power system, which is why the Pharisees are doing what they're doing, because they're working with the power system to make more power for themselves. That's part of what Jesus is often calling out and calls out in this story. But in this story between the woman and Jesus and the disciples, the oppressed one is the woman. And Jesus falls victim to his privilege. And that's not the point I think Matthew was trying to make, but it's what happened here. And this is one of those stories that I feel very confident. It probably didn't happen exactly as Matthew shows it, and Mark gives us a slightly different version of this. But this is something that I think probably really happened. Because Jesus doesn't look great here. And we're reading the stories that are basically trying to get us to believe and fall for this Jesus guy. So anytime we get a story where Jesus doesn't look great, I think there's a really good chance that this is something that's gotten through the propaganda, if you know what I mean. This is something that probably really happened that meant something to those who heard it and talked about it even if they didn't know why. Because why else give us a story where Jesus doesn't look good for a moment, unless it really happened? Because whatever Matthew meant or thought, I can't hear or read the scripture and not recognize that Jesus in the beginning is wrong. Whatever justification Matthew might have for it, Jesus was wrong. But he recognizes it. Because he listens to her when she refuses to let go of what everyone else gets freely. And he checks the words that he spoke, unintentionally, perhaps, that weren't too clean. Now, this is one story. A lot of times, it kind of gets separated out, but when you read the whole thing, even though it's two very different situations, it's clearly meant to be read as one story. The cleanliness of the words, and then Jesus' encounter with this woman. So let's take part one, the need to speak wholly, to allow the words that come from our mouths, having passed through our hearts, to be clean and holy, thereby furthering God's plan. And let's contrast that with what comes next. Jesus treating the outsider with unholy words. He literally calls her a dog. What does it mean when even Jesus can allow his own societal-based understanding of the way that things should be to ignore the humanity of somebody in front of him? If Jesus can fall into that trap, how much more susceptible are we? This text, when we take the whole thing about how it matters what we say and how it matters how we treat those on the outside, we're reminded that we need both clean words and pure actions. And we need to be aware about our own privilege, our own power. And we need to work to make the world more equal for those without it. You know, The Defenders is about 4 heroes: Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Iron Fist. But there are 4 other superheroes in that show who in the comics are superheroes, although they're not yet in the show. But those of us who read comics recognize that Claire Temple is actually a night nurse. And we know that Misty Knight and Colleen Wing are actually the daughters of the dragon. And we know that Patsy Walker, or Trish as she's called in the show, is actually Hellcat. But they don't know that about themselves. And no one around them does either. Yet they each have their heroic moments in the series. Although the one thing I don't like about the Defenders is Hellcat doesn't get her moment. Patsy Walker doesn't get her big moment. But everybody else does. And now she does in Jessica Jones season 1. But unlike the 4 main heroes who everyone else around sees already as heroes, we have 4 superheroes kind of waiting in the wings that nobody else sees, that nobody else knows what they're capable of and what they will achieve. And I was reminded that that's kind of like us. You see, we also have the ability to change the world. Even if we don't think so, and even if no one around us thinks so either. With clean and holy hearts, and with actions that lift up and empower the downtrodden and the powerless, we can bring about the kingdom of earth, kingdom of heaven on earth, as it is